Recording in
Okay,
progress.
recording in progress. But yeah, hello. First of all, thank you so much for doing this interview, and also thank you so much for doing a remix of our track. Just wanted to go through kind of like your background, because you've got an amazing portfolio of your own work and your remixes, as well as like production stuff, but you've also got credits on loads of records with some really amazing artists. I just wanted to ask how the two fit together and if there's like a lean towards either area.
So I try and separate the two. It's kind of an interesting one. So like when it comes to a technical role whereby I'm just like making sure everything sounds good in the room, I often, it depends on who I'm working with. So if I'm working with songwriters, top line writers, then a lot of the creative work is kind of left to them to work out.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just purely from a technical point of view. Other times, the artist is comfortable with me being in the room whilst they're writing. There are other sessions where there'll be like pre-production before the artist comes in. So there may be some additional input on the creative side of things. It could just be like a simple case of like, why don't we try 9 chord here instead of the triad or the 7th or something like that, just kind of, or like an inversion, like first or second inversion, and it's like, oh well, this might sound better here. But it's rarely beyond that. From my point of view, it's just a case of seeing what sounds the best for the records. That's kind of more or less the engineering side of things.
So do you ever go into production from kind of engineering work and get involved in production afterwards, or is production kind of like a side passion project that you end up committing to creatively?
Yes. So often is the case is recording technical first, then production, remix stuff second. Or I might be excited to work with the artist, so like, oh, can I play you this track that I made? And then I'll play them like a demo that I've worked on, and then that could lead to something. And vice versa, they might show me something based on some prior work that I've done with them on the technical side of things. And they might bring in that secondary, like another demo later, like, oh, I've worked on this song. Do you want to do something together on this one?
Nice.
But it really depends. Sometimes I'll get a collection of tracks together and then I'll pitch to sort of like library music companies and things like that. I'm creating this sort of music at the moment. Do you have any briefs that work specifically for this sort of music? And then
interesting.
That's kind of another way of
is that something that you like want to kind of like diversify more into? Just
yes and no. So at the moment I'm building like a sample pack, like just a drum sample pack that I'm hopefully going to release later in the year. It was kind of a win-win sort of situation. So I kind of approached a drummer that I've worked with a number of times when I was doing like jazz ensemble stuff. That all that jazz stuff was like a while ago. It's like 8 years ago. Okay. But one of the drummers that was part of that project, Peter Hill, who was the person that I ended up recording for this like sample pack project. Jazz drummer. He's done a lot of hip hop stuff as well. We recorded like some drums for different eras of like the disco kind of sound. So like 70s drum sounds. The majority of the content's all there. It just needs editing and a couple of bits of additional processing through some outboard gear in order to just have some alternative samples that some people may or may not want to use. So there'll be like some heavily compressed, like really upfront sounding drums, which don't even sound like that sort of era. And then there'll be like sort of like more dry samples and bespoke hardware that was only available at that particular time.
Wow.
So just running through different chains, but also the actual drum, it kind of had an evolution. So we swapped the kick drums out, used like a larger kick drum for like the 80s sound. Went through like some processes that kind of developed through 70s and 80s. So like using the NS10 cone, which is kind of, you may or may not be aware of. So like a sub kick, and you put like an NS10 cone, you rewire it. So the two cables, like the positive and negative of the actual movement of the cone, they come off on like two separate individual wires. You get them on most hi-fi speakers as well. It's like a red and black cable.
Yeah.
Effectively, the speaker itself is acting as a microphone. It effectively acts as like a low-end microphone. So that goes in front of the bass port on the kick drum, if it has one. 80s drum sound, they kind of started doing that, cutting a hole out in creating a bass port to just reinforce the low end, because it completely changes the drum sound when you do have like and the same thing can be said about like the manufacturer of like cabinets and things like that, and even like when it comes to like speakers in the wall, if they don't have sufficient bass porting, then they effectively become like the whole wall becomes like a resonant chamber, and it completely changes the way that the speakers sound.
Everything sounds, yeah.
It's weird because like there's a lot of like really fancy looking studios that have these speakers in the wall, but they're not sufficiently ported, so they actually aren't true to how they're should be sounding. Like if it looks good, then it's going to sound good, right? That's like kind of more of the thing. If it's impressive to people, then
it doesn't really matter whether it sounds good, because then we'll get people in anyways.
But people can make really great music on like earbuds. It is
True.
really a case of knowing your studio, basically, and or whether or not that's like your just laptop and your earbuds and you're going around wherever, that's still your studio, whether or not it's portable or not.
And you know its capabilities and you know its limitations.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you know its nuances and what makes it work and what makes it not work. And then what sounds good and what doesn't sound good. And then you can translate that to other systems based on theoretical knowledge and trial and error, basically. It's the same with, I mean, I'm sure when the NS10s became synonymous in studios, I mean, they were originally hi-fi speakers that people had in their homes. They ended up making their way into the studio because it was like a reference speaker for like radio systems at the time.
Yeah, so it's basically like super useful because everyone has it. So this is how it's going to sound in everyone's home.
Exactly, 100%. So that's why there are like technological advancements now. For example, there's a plugin called like Audio that you can download for your iPhone. I think they have an Android version, which you load up a VST plugin version of that in your session. You have it on your master, and then it will stream either over Wi-Fi or Bluetooth to your phone. So your phone is effectively the reference speaker. So there are like ways of kind of imitating that kind of style of referencing.
Yeah, because you know that there's going to be someone somewhere listening to this in a park on their phone.
Exactly.
Yeah. But totally. Speaking of gear and plugins and software, what's your current? Do you have like a current favorite? Like, this is my. When you get really obsessed with using something. What's your anything that you're like currently super into?
There are a few things. I really like the Arturia FX Collection 3. It's just come out sort of like maybe a week or two ago. Yeah, I'm really liking that. They've got like an emulation of the Culture Vulture, which is Thermonic Culture's like hardware unit, which with some additional advanced features like distorting very particular bands. You can set the bands. It has a nice like bias feature. It sounds really good. It sounds really authentic. That particular plugin, but they have like loads of other really interesting emulations of like op-amp distortion or bucket brigade type delays and spring reverbs and things like that. It's worth checking out, even if you can like demo it. And then of course there's like software synths by a company called Yuhi and Exfer Records Serum. Basically all the sounds on the remix were kind of like handmade through Exfer Serum. There's a lot of like nuances to it that it ultimately comes down to layering. So like you might have like a soft sounding, really long attack pad type sound, but if you want to make it more plucky, you might layer the same chords or a melodic line in a kind of more abrupt attack type thing. And then that gives you control. And then if you have them as separate instances, you can have control over your attack and release, so to speak, and you can bed the pad sound more. So you have more of a transient on individual sounds. So you can do it that way, or you can use like transient shapers and things like that, or even bust the two together and kind of just go wild. Even like maybe using these Arturia plugins or something to just kind of like. But that's also an interesting caveat for sound design, because like you can throw delays on just the transient of the sound rather than throwing delays over the whole entire sound. So it gives you more kind of control over sound design stuff, and I kind of like to approach things that way. There's a whole nother side to put the performance side of sound design, where like you can have a release pedal or a sustain pedal doing like inverse functions. So you could play one sound, and then as soon as you let go, this sound might sustain whilst you've got the sustain on, or and then as soon as you let go of the sustain, and a secondary sound comes in. So like it does the opposite. So you have like that sound stops, and then the other sound comes up. So it's almost like you're side chaining with your sustain pedal on two separate sounds. It's cool. Once you get really like into the creative side of that sort of thing, it's really cool.
You've 100% sold it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of like, there's a lot of like other like nuggets of info that are just kind of like how can you be more expressive with the tools that you have, and often like limiting the tools that you have. For example, just having one synth, and then just getting to grips with like as much as possible what you can do with that sound, even going on the back end and doing other random stuff is probably more beneficial than just buying loads of tools and it's been like throwing presets on. I mean, people do that, but it's way more fun, and I'll be very long-winded to kind of go through and do everything to an aesthetic degree where like you're designing everything from scratch.
Yeah, of course, you can't control every single parameter of everything, but also there is a like joy to just limiting yourself to the point where you don't have like infinite choice and infinite tools. You're not going to be able to learn how to use everything.
Exactly. And any like I'd even say for compatibility, because I used to use Ableton on PC as well as on Mac. I found that before I used Ableton, I used to use FL Studio, and I got pretty nuanced with the shortcuts and everything. But as I progressed into a professional work environment where I was using Macs all the time, it was like, oh, I'm kind of having to get really slow at like producing on like Macs, even though I'm like much quicker on PC. So I was like, it eventually got to the point where I was like, okay, I need to find some pieces of software that work on both PC and Mac, and Ableton was kind of like the go-to for like transitioning from PC to Mac. And eventually I ended up just doing everything on Mac because that's what everyone uses for creative stuff. So having like stock plugin, like building stuff or creating stuff with stock plugins is probably more beneficial for any upcoming producer or engineer. Is much more beneficial over using third-party things like Arturia and Sound Toys and Waves or whatever. And it costs nothing. You just buy the DAW, use all the stock plugins that it comes with, and they're really good nowadays. Like the emulations.
Yeah, they've gotten a lot better.
Yeah, you can do so much now compared to like in terms of just natively being able to record stuff without having to use external hardware. It's come a very long way compared to how it was maybe like 10 years ago. Even on the ADDA, like analog to digital conversion, vice versa. 10 years ago, if you were using a budget like 2 in 2 out interface, you could hear how like smeared all the transients were. There was no like clear definition in those interfaces because the conversion process was very, I wouldn't say it wasn't very clear, it wasn't very defined, and with chip redesigns and things like this, it became a lot more cost effective to have like different versions or different models of things. But yeah, it is an interesting one, and I think that kind of shapes what is put out, especially from like bedroom producers and things like that. If we look at like music from 2010, 2011, 2012, there is a very particular sound of that era, and it's not one that I'm very like happy, not one that I'm like
super into.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's a very weird kind of sound that just doesn't really sound great. I kind of wonder as well if like if it was something related to like the financial crisis of 2008, 2009 had a significant impact on a lot of jobs across the board in different industries. So I kind of wonder, I mean, I was still at school at the time, but there was also like a downturn in the music industry at that particular point because of things like LimeWire, Napster, MP3 sharing, all this kind of stuff, peer-to-peer file sharing. And it was and I always find it weird, like the approach that music industry kind of took on that, like anti-piracy, blah blah blah, kind of going to this whole model of just go after the people that like everyone that is like. I mean, there was a thing, but it's like it's ridiculous because like that just costs too much money to go after everyone because it's like lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit. It's just like
that's just you're throwing money out the window and it's not going to come back.
Yeah. I mean, we've ultimately come to the point of streaming and things like that,
which is kind of similarly bad for the music industry, but in a legal way where they can't even come after the people that caused it, I suppose. Well, not necessarily bad, but
I'm more on the side of like, if more people listen to your music and they're listening to your music more often, so like they'll hear it once, they hear it twice, or they have it with them, they take it with them. That in itself is more worthwhile than going after people that have like not paid for the music, because
I think that's
what
fair.
had happened.
Like I think in the terms of like 2000, like 8, 10, when LimeWire and things were a thing, I think it's much better to just let it go, viral. People emailing MP3s that were ripped off. Well, YouTube was a thing, yes. Emailing MP3s that were ripped off YouTube, or just torrenting your entire album. I suppose right now the way that Spotify is, most artists won't, other than the people that have like millions of streams, won't really get that much finance from that either. Like it's just touring that will make you money, I suppose.
Yeah. So the counter argument, and I think I remember hearing or reading an interview. I think it was like Franz Ferdinand were very like pro. Hopefully, I've got this right and I've remembered correctly. But I think Franz Ferdinand at the time were very pro people sharing music because ultimately it leads to more people becoming fans of the band or the artist, and that means more ticket sales, more merch sales, more people showing up to the gigs because you're now connecting to people. That, for example, you might have a London band or a Manchester band or Mancunian band or Scottish band or whatever. Historically, the way for anyone abroad in like America or like Europe or Oceania or something, the only way they would be able to hear that music was if their record was physically in the record shops in those territories. And there was this whole thing about licensing and territorial agreements and things like that, which was a bit of a minefield to navigate. And what the MP3 revolution kind of did was break down those kind of barriers for licensing and kind of music taking a very long time to come out in another part of the world. It broke down those barriers and it allowed for musicians and artists to break in other countries. Like they've become more popular in like places like Germany before they become household names in the UK or whatever. Like that's happened a number of times as a result of not just like MP3 file sharing, but like through streaming and things like that. It eventually kind of led to that. So it's bizarre.
It's weird to think of because like in the late 80s, early 90s, my uncle would like go to Finland to get music because you just couldn't get the records that you wanted. You just couldn't buy any Western records whatsoever. He went there for 6 months, spent all of his money on records, and then just lived in the woods off like bread for the rest of it.
That's crazy.
I mean, it's mad to think that now I can check on Spotify and be like, wait, someone listened to our song in this weird little Polish village. I wonder who they are," kind of thing.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
you
yeah.
can even like see the data and figure it out. It's just such a different experience to exactly what you're saying. Someone in Australia not ever being able to hear a record unless someone either posted it to them or
Yeah.
Waiting 2 years for it to come out.
And it's good that you mentioned that as well, because it allows for independents to track where their fan base is to like almost like a macroscopic level, which is like where kind of big data comes in, where effectively all of that data can be compiled into that one person that like is very like niche, but I know they will like this thing, so I'm just gonna like market to them. And that allows you to kind of refine the advert. If you really, 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 really want those people to kind of engage with your posts, then you can go through the process of refining
just
that
like
one
doing
thing.
it over and over again, or just tweaking it.
Yeah,
that's exactly it. It's a rabbit hole, but it's a cool rabbit hole, and it does give so much more power to, I suppose, the maker.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. Like on the independent side of things, you have all the tools there, and if you don't know how to use the tools, you have the information on how to use the tools, all available for free. I say free figuratively, but like if you have access to the internet, then you can learn all of these things given time. So it's like it really comes down to the individual and whether or not they want to create that particular content to push to whatever market they want to.
Exactly.
And that's there's no barrier there. I mean, there's a slight financial barrier, but like,
but it's nothing even close to what it would have been, 15, 20 years ago. I sometimes feel very stressed living in this era, but then sometimes feel really lucky. And I suppose it's a mixture of that, just like the infinite amount of opportunities and like the fact that you can definitely do it all. Makes it quite hard to accept if you haven't done it all, but also it's amazing that you can
do that. Yeah, and to add to that, there's also the trap of falling into a saturated market, which means that you don't get heard at all. You got to find your niche, and that's always been the case. You got to find your market.
True. The remix itself, how was your kind of like creative process?
So actually, funnily enough, when it was mentioned about the other artists that were involved on the remixing side of things, I was like, okay, let me listen to some of their like music what they put out, and I kind of like got inspired by everyone that was kind of involved with the the remixing process. So I was like,
cool.
Oh, it's like I've done something not quite like this, but I was like, I did have like an idea for like a kind of 80s style synth pop-ish type thing, which involved like Lindrums and kind of like drum machine-ish type sounds, along with like some just heavy synth-driven sound design elements. And I had dabbled in that sort of stuff a few years ago. Funnily enough, it's kind of come full circle. When I did create music like that, it was like before The Weeknd had like done all of their 80s style stuff, and Ken Vinsky did like Drive and kind of like all of that sort of stuff. Like it was kind of prior to that, and it was just weird like how it kind of that particular sound ended up being a thing anyway. So I was like, had I stuck to that one sound, and I could have paved a way as a niche, but I don't like to kind of be pigeonholed into like one particular style of sound. So like when it came to your remix, I wanted to do something like that because I have admiration for that sound that a few people can do quite well.
Well, it seems including you, definitely.
Thank you. It's quite a chilled song. It's very nice. It's very easily listening to. It's quite a beautiful track to listen to from start to finish. So it's like, and it does take you on a journey. So I was like, how do I take an essence of this but put a spin on it, which is like maybe kind of more of a contrasting? Because there's one thing I like about creating music, and it's like creating contrast, especially with remixes. So with my remix of Glasshouse, it was like creating a story that started like someone was listening to it on a sort of like record or something, or kind of like archived thing. So you hear like this button being pressed to kind of start the track, and it's almost kind of like the idea of opening like one of those music boxes, and it has like a little dancing person in it or whatever. I don't know if you're familiar with them. They're
I'm
quite
very
old
familiar.
school, like
I love that.
50s
That's
old.
very, very meta. I don't know if you've played Siberia, this old computer game.
What was it called? Sorry, what was it? What's
it's called Siberia. It's very quite like kind of steampunk, but not steampunk to the point of being cringe. And there's kind of a lot of like the messaging, or a lot of the clues that you'll find are in those kind of like music box or like voice cylinders. It opens up and then the whole story unfolds from this
exactly.
one like little vocal cylinder.
So
yeah.
I don't know that reference, but it is exactly the same principle. So like you open it up and it's the music itself is supposed to tell a story, but then it goes from this and it evolves into this like really deep, heavy bass driven kind of like synth pop thing, and that in itself with your vocals kind of create this story, which is very contrasting to the very atmospheric chill vibe, but retaining kind of an essence of the meaning of the original track, I think. Yeah, so it is basically, as I was saying before, like the contrasting of like organic elements against like kind of more hybrid electronic kind of sound. So you hear like vocoded versions of your vocals in there, and there has been some kind of changes to the melody of the original vocal as well that kind of fit in with the new chords and the structure of the progression and everything. So but it was really fun working with the chorus, and when I was writing the piece, that I had this like progression that I really liked, and I didn't want, and it didn't quite fit in with the vocal that was there. So I kind of like had one bar and then, or like two bars, and then cut out like the second bar, 3 and 4, and then sort of like 5 and 6, and then cut out 7 and 8, and then in between, initially in the initial demo version of the remix, I had like it was like a call and response. So that was the initial idea. Is like you have this organic vocal, and then it's kind of responded with like the armor being your natural element of yourself, your kind of the robots kind of dictating to you like you should do this thing. So that was kind of like the original idea, kind of like, as I was saying before, like contrasting. Yeah, so eventually I ended up like sacking off the vocoded vocal in the chorus, and then just melodyning the melody to work with the chord progression that I had. And then as a post-chorus element, I had the original vocal back as a kind of that whole section being a response, and it allowed me to build that nicely into like the second verse. Yeah, so you have this build up to the main beat of the chorus, and then this kind of the energy comes down a little bit, and then it continues again on the verse, and it allows the story to kind of continue and flow in a way that it doesn't sound too crazy.
Too crazy.
Yeah. So
no, it doesn't, like it's the perfect like right amount of crazy.
Yeah, I mean there's some crazy sound design stuff in there as
definitely. Okay, so as a last kind of like final little question, do you have any like upcoming projects that you want anyone to keep an eye out, or anything exciting?
Yeah, so initially, I mean, the sample pack that I mentioned at the beginning, earlier on, and then I'm kind of excited about doing the whole analytics thing that I mentioned. So like doing sponsored posts and seeing who engages with this sample pack. Yeah, it's building a product that works for artists and musicians, and maybe even like people that kind of want to dabble in making music and stuff. So there's that initial kind of ready to go samples, and then they'll hear music that may or may not be related to that, but there's already an audience there. And it's a bit of maybe it's a weird way of approach, like leading a record label with a product that's like not music but it's music related. It's probably a very strange approach, but at the same time a lot can be said about like the crypto space and NFTs and artists kind of putting out music through NFTs as their first initial product. So it's like yeah, why not
Yeah, I
do
think
a sample pack or a
it's
producer
cool
pack or
that you're
something?
walking like the path. Definitely, well, not to my knowledge, not walked yet. Because it's way more exciting than just doing what everyone else has done previously. And I reckon it's gonna work really well. On that note, thank you so much for thanks so much for the interview
That's all right, you're welcome.
and thank you again for the remix and thanks for your time.
Pleasure.